This is a Film Stories original podcast.
Love this podcast? Support this show through the Acast supporter feature. It's up to you how much you give, and there's no regular commitment. Just hit the link in the show description to support now.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can find options that fit your budget and potentially lower your bills. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Cue the fireplace and your favorite fall movie. There's nothing better than a cozy evening at home with a glass of First Leaf wine. First Leaf is a personalized wine club that delivers right to your door. Sounds magical, right? They get to know your favorite tasting notes, which varietals you enjoy, and whether you prefer sweet or dry wines. So in every shipment, you get bottles tailored to your unique palate. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/fall to get your first 6 wines for just $44.95 with free shipping.
This is Writers on Film, the only podcast dedicated to books on cinema. Hello everybody and welcome to Writers on Film. My name is John Bleasdale. I'm a writer and film critic, and today I'm going to be talking to Mark Edlitz, who has written a incredibly fun book called Movies Go Forth. This is a book which brings together a series of interviews about films which are the fourth entry in their franchise, and it is as you will hear from our conversation, it brings up some very interesting comparisons, very interesting juxtapositions and ideas, and I had a whale of a time reading the book and a really great time talking to Mark. If you enjoy the conversation, please remember to spread the word. You can leave a review, you can share the podcast, of course, all the episodes. Please check out the other episodes if you haven't had a chance. Also, you can follow me on Twitter and social media at Dr. John T, DRJONTY. But before you do any of that, please enjoy the conversation. I was really intrigued by your book because of this idea of like fourth movies. And initially when I started reading it, I was kind of thinking, okay, this is a concept which seems a little bit random, if you don't mind me saying. But then as I went on, it was kind of weird how patterns began to come out. That there are a lot of fourth movies that do this, or there are a lot of fourth movies that do that kill a series, or that reboot a series. Was that something that you started with, or was that something that sort of emerged as you went on with the book and the research?
Yeah, that's a good question. And yes, I let's start with the first part, which isn't a question, which is a statement. It's a weird book. Yes. I wrote a book just on fourth movies. Even my family gently ridicules me for it because it's not necessarily what the world was asking for, a book just looking at fourth movies and series. And that's in part because of the way fourth movies and series are perceived. When you're doing a list of the worst films of all time, the easy answers are Jaws 4, Superman 4, The Quest for Peace, and Joel Schumacher's Batman and Robin. And then look, you've got 7 out of 10, and your list is already done. And what are those 3 things have in common? Obviously, is that they're all fourth films in popular series. And I'm not 100% sure how I came up with this idea. I think I backed up into it. I've always had a fascination with Jaws 4 because I loved the first one. When I was growing up, I really liked the second one too. I thought it was just as worthy at the time. There was so much goodwill from Jaws 1 that you buy into Jaws 2. You've got Roy Scheider. You're halfway there. All good. And then
great poster as well. Great poster and great tagline.
And it's a great poster and it's a great tagline. So you buy into it. And then when you get to 3, you sort of say, oh, what's going on here? And then by the time you get to the fourth one, the wheels have fallen off the wagon. And then the same thing with Superman 4. Superman 1 and 2 are so good and have such great performances by Christopher Reeve that they're classics. And then when you get to Superman 3, something's not quite right. The tone is off. It's focusing on a comic character, the Richard Pryor. And then Superman 4 is not well liked. There's famously production problems with it, and it's sort of cheap looking. And so subsequently, people don't like it. And we can talk about it either now or later, but there was what appealed to me about the film, while we're still keeping it more a global conversation about fourths in general, is that I see a good film in there somewhere. I see what they're trying to do. They bring it back to the relationship with with Lois and Clark. They try to bring back the regulars. They bring back Gene Hackman. It is an effort to bring it back to its roots, and that's what the interviews with the filmmaker of that. All these, I should add that the book is a look at different films as told by the filmmakers themselves. So I interviewed the writers and the directors and occasionally the actors to get their experience of working on the thing. And originally, I think each chapter or each movie was intended to be sort of a case study. And, Psycho 4 might represent a horror film, and Superman 4 might represent a superhero film, and so on. But then once you start getting into, well, I've got Psycho 4, you're like, well, I might as well get Michael Myers. I might as well get Freddy. I might as well, get Jason. And then you've got the big, those big 3. But so each chapter is meant to look at some different aspect of franchise storytelling or making sequels.
Yeah. And there is a sort of generic thing as well that, when Jaws 2 comes out, there isn't, not generic. There's a historical thing. We can go into genre in a moment because you divide the book in terms of genre. But historically, when you have Jaws 2, not many people are making sequels. Spielberg famously sort of walks away from it because he feels sequels are a little bit beneath him as a thing. Although, quite rightly, bring up the unmade Spielberg version of.
Yeah, so there was a possible way forward, which is there's that great speech that they sort of made into a play with Robert Shaw talking about the sinking of the ship and the wide eyes of the sharks and all the people treading water, and they were all eaten to death by many different sharks. And Spielberg had this idea, well, I don't want to make a sequel, but I'd be open to telling that story, and obviously that would be a big tonal change, and it would be much easier just to do the same thing twice. And that's what you get sometimes with these sequels in general, is the first one is so good, do the second, make the same movie with slight variations. And that's actually what Bond is, continuity and change, or what Bruce Fierstein, 3-time Bond screenwriter, calls the same but different, where the first and second films are often the same. The third one, someone has an idea, let's do something different, which is a good instinct. Let's not making the same film over and over again. Audiences get disappointed. And then the fourth film is often an attempt to get back to basics.
Or they go to space.
or alternatively, they can and should go to space, as in Leprechaun 4, and I think Critters 4. And the other thing I wanted to say about that was something really important that I will save for another moment because it's lost.
It's not come back. Okay.
Here it is. Here it is.
Go ahead.
So Spielberg's experience of being a witness to these Jaws sequels, I think, is the reason why he's so intimately involved with these Jurassic Park sequels. Spielberg obviously did 1 and 2, and then for the other ones, he continued to oversee, and he wouldn't just rubber stamp and let other he would select the filmmakers, work with them on the stories, support their ideas. My impression is that he's never trying to impose his aesthetic on another filmmaker, but he is willing to say, well, what about this? What about this? And I think that's why, some of these films are just obviously blockbusters. They've kept up the audience interest.
Yeah, I mean, another thing that strikes me about Spielberg's idea of the Indianapolis story is that would have meant a much larger budget, bigger cast, more sharks, more technical problems, a period film, which is a bigger budget automatically. And sequels were considered a sort of losing formula, sort of a quick cash grab. And the only way to really make money to make sure you cut the budget. So nowadays, the economics works in the other way, where the budget goes up. But with the original sequel, it was actually the budget would go down if you were going for a Poseidon Adventure 2.
Yeah, well, yeah, absolutely correctly. There's a diminishing returns on the box office, and if you know that your second and third and fourth film are going to do less well at the box office, you say, well, the only way to make a profit, which is the goal of these, is to try to make a less expensive movie. But the thing is, if you're going to bring back the core characters, you're going to have to pay the actor. So you're paying the actors more, and you're putting less money into the production. So that's what it's. Which also helps. Yeah, please.
Or you get George Kennedy to replace Yul Brynner, and I'm sure George will turn up for a sandwich at times.
Well, that's the thing. Then you have these films that the Magnificent Seven series, as you're referring to, the Yul Brynner character wasn't the same actor each time. You get some. George Kennedy has his charms, but not as Yul Brynner, not in this heroic,
Yeah, he was never a leading man, was he? He was always sort of Paul Newman's mate or the Clint Eastwood's mate in the Eiger Sanction. He was always
right. He's better as, the Ernest Borgnine character in like The Wild Bunch than he is as William Holden in The Wild Bunch.
Yeah, absolutely. He's quite a similar character to Borgnine, isn't he? He's kind of. I wonder if they used to get. I wonder who. I think that Borgnine won an Oscar, so he would have been above Kennedy in the in the pecking order. I'm thinking who got whose scripts first,
As you pointed out, just with the Magnificent Seven, there's certain hero jobs that lend themselves to sequels. If you're a cop, you could always get another case. If you're a detective, you could always get another case. If you're a spy, you always get another mission. If you're a superhero, there's always another supervillain to attack. And in the Magnificent Ambersons, in the Magnificent Seven, there's always another village to save. I guess Rocky is interesting because there's always another fight to have. But certain, the thing about disaster movies is they don't lend themselves to sequels per se, because how many, tall buildings can you set on fire and how many earthquakes can you have? So in that case, you don't tend to make sequels. Comedies don't necessarily lend themselves to sequels, although, I interviewed a lot of the guys from the Police Academy series. They had a lot. They certainly made it, high number count.
Yeah, Police Academy, you make the very good point as well, though, that I think they've got, 7 or 8 sequels or 7 or 8 films, I should say. But most of the profits were made on the first 2. The rest of the films were pretty meager showings after the first two had made their
right. But you could make it. You can make up your money on TV sales, on foreign sales, or on packaging them with other films in the series, which elevates the series. And when your new movie comes out, you put out the DVDs and Blu-rays of the first, or VHS tapes in the case of Police Academy, and it reignites those sales.
Yeah,
and so that's another incentive for doing this.
That's absolutely true. I remember thinking, especially in the sort of the heyday of the DVDs, there seemed to be certain trilogies that you were going, well, I don't remember this being a trilogy. And it was like obvious they've probably made the third film in order to give it. But that's another point that I wanted to ask you about, because trilogy seems to have a certain, we have the Star Wars trilogy, we have the Nolan Batman trilogy. So it seems to make a certain sense of something pleasing about three as a structure.
Absolutely. A trilogy is a perfect structure. It's a beginning, middle, and end. Or I think it's Aaron Sorkin who says, Act 1, you get your hero up the tree. Act 2, you throw rocks at them. And Act 3, you get them down. And a good trilogy sort of does that. Obviously Star Wars was, you could say, built as a trilogy. I know there's controversy about that or uncertainty about that. And, a certain amount of the filmmakers making it up as you go along. And when they say they have plans for the second and third film, that often can be very generic plans. It doesn't mean that they've mapped out every story point. But, in the 80s, 90s, trilogies used to be the hallmark of movie going and a sign that your series has made it and entered the pop culture lexicon. There used to be an Indiana Jones trilogy. There used to be a Mad Max trilogy. But when you get into fourths, you also get into a point where you can run the risk of altering your character. Like when you look at John McClane in Die Hard, he's an ordinary man in an extraordinary circumstance. And then by the time you get to the fourth one, he's jumping off of, airplanes onto motorcycles or vice versa. But, it goes up a notch and you've changed your character. With Ripley in the Aliens film, that is a beginning, middle, and end with Alien 1, 2, and 3. You see what should be the ending of, or what feels like the ending of her character. And then in Aliens 4, she's not quite dead. I mean, she's, you know what I'm saying? She's technically dead, and they but she's, they undead her.
Yeah, I mean, she's cloned with alien DNA, so there's a bit of her is actually, you've got rid of that.
It's a workaround.
Yeah,
it's like we're in science fiction. It's a way of undoing what you've done, and you've in that case you've really changed the essential element of that character and how she functions. And that's one of the tricky things: is should the character remain stagnant for the entire series, or can there and should there be an evolution? And you see an evolution in Spock through those Star Trek films. He slightly warms up, and I guess if we're talking about dead, well, that happens in 3. It's another example of a not quite dead character.
Yeah, the dead and the resurrection sort of thing is something which Matrix Resurrections as well. It is something which seems to come into the 4th chapter more, and it is something that seems to be pervasive in our culture. But I always feel that at that point, some dramatic integrity has been lost. I mean, I even feel it these days. Game of Thrones for me, spoiler for anybody who's not aware of Game of Thrones, but the minute Jon Snow is dead and then alive, I'm like, okay, there's no more rules anymore. You're not, there's no gravity to this planet. I can't. I mean, I'll watch it; it'll be fun, but I'm not going to invest any emotion in this anymore. And I think maybe this is because I'm a kid of the 70s, and I remember 70s, 80s, and I remember Bobby Ewing coming out of the shower, and it's just like as soon as that happens, it's we've jumped the shark.
Right. Well, you also made me think of the Charles Bronson character in Death Wish, because by the fourth film, he should stop forming meaningful relationships with women, and he should stop speaking to any surviving family members, because the premise of Death Wish, as everyone knows, is that someone he loves is violently attacked, and he gets revenge. So for that series to function, they each time the filmmakers need to come up with another person that he cares about to be violently attacked, and it becomes a very perverse premise.
Yeah, in fact, I mean, I really like that idea of like there's only so many directions you can turn and twist a character, and then they become another character altogether. In the case of Ripley, you're absolutely right. I mean, there's also another thing, which is I always feel like in the fourth episode or installment, I shouldn't say always, I shouldn't use superlatives, because your book is full of exceptions to precisely these points, but there's always that sense that somebody is also, I get the feeling that people are spitballing ideas in a room. They're going, okay, this is what we've done in the first three films, and I remember a lot of talk, I think it was on the commentary of the fourth Alien film, where for a lot of time it was supposed to be Alien on Earth. That was going to be the whole idea, and then they kind of, for various reasons, decided to go with this version that they ended up with. So there is that feeling of sort of like possibilities are sort of much more open. You could kind of almost do anything, and then they choose to do this, that, or the other.
Yeah, I mean, when Superman 3 doesn't work, in part because I remember one of the producers saying that you do an origin story and then it's time just for another adventure. If you look at a comic book, sometimes just an adventure and there's just a bad guy, and that can work, and does with James Bond, but I don't know if it gives it enough emotional weight and importance for the movie going audience. And then so Superman 4 was an effort to get away from just the villain of the week and reveal something about the character.
That's a really interesting point, because that's something, the way you've just described it makes me think, well, that's what television does, isn't it? It does, like, next week Columbo will be solving another mystery, or the A-Team will ride into town and save another thing. But movies, we want something more momentous than that. We want something that is life-changing, both to the people that we're watching on screen and to ourselves.
Yeah, and that becomes sort of one of the challenges of franchise filmmaking, both in the movies that have come out in the past and when they're going forward, is how much of the story you're telling. You want it, whatever story you're telling, you generally want it to have a complete beginning, middle, and end. And if there's story threads that will continue for future movies, they do. But that's another thing that filmmakers struggle with, is how much of the universe for the future movies do we want to set up, and how much of the story should just be its own story. And the thing that it's always good to remember is, if this first film doesn't work, there's not going to be another fifth film, Yeah,
absolutely. Or even a second film in the case of The Golden Compass, which I thought was a perfectly good film, and was, looking forward to seeing the others.
Well, yeah, sometimes the fourth film is intended to be the first film in a new series. Like if you look at Highlander 4, Christopher Lambert, who is the Highlander of the films, was meeting the TV Highlander, and it was an effort to pass the torch. Sometimes the fourth film is the passing of the torch film, which Scream 4 pretended to do, and then did a little twist where it wasn't a passing of the torch film. You were meant to believe that one character is the new Sidney Prescott, and that person was not.
Yeah, who knew that Scream would be so slippery in playing with our expectations? You've already said that you were fascinated by some Superman 4, and which of the other fourth entries did you find particular, like a compelling argument for this one's actually? I mean, I think you mentioned in the book that Friday the 13th, for instance, is like the peak of the Friday the 13th series.
Well, the funny thing about Friday the 13th Part 4 is that it's called the final chapter, and it's most certainly not the final chapter. I'm also really interested in. So I think, just sticking with horror films for 1 second, I think Psycho 4 is an interesting film, and it did something that the Bates Motel TV series did, which was very, very, very good. The TV series, and it was also both a Psycho 4, which was interesting to me because it's both a sequel and a prequel. It shows Norman Bates growing up and his evolution into being the killer that we know and love, and then it also keeps with Anthony Perkins and shows what's happening to him in later life. So I thought that was an interesting one. What was the question again?
I'm just interested. I mean, that Psycho one is interesting because you mentioned, but the Bates Motel, and that's another thing which I think your book is really interesting because it has all these sequels, almost from a time in which having a fourth episode was kind of a rarity. And as you say with Jason in the Friday the 13th, even Scream to some degree, Fast and Furious, Twilight, Harry Potter, there's lots now. That franchise filmmaking became kind of the norm. So a fourth episode is just the one before the fifth. It's no longer. Yes,
exactly. And then a lot of times there is a fourth film just because the title is popular enough and you're ensured you could make a DVD sale or a TV sale. Before researching this book, I didn't know that there was a Home Alone 4, and I didn't know that there was a Meatballs 4. And I can't remember the exact number of shooting days, but they shot Home Alone 4 in I think South Africa on in like 21 days or something. And there's also a Porky's 4, which they shot in half that time, maybe less. And Porky's 4 wasn't even called Porky's 4. It was called Pimpin' Pee-wee, named after the character. Pee-wee was the lead, and he sort of becomes a pimp in this one. So he's Pimpin' Pee-wee, which is funny to make a part 4 and avoid the Porky's title, which is the only draw is sort of nostalgia for that for that series, for whatever it was. But that was made as a ash can copy, which is a really weird thought. An ash can copy is made just to preserve the copyright on the material. So the filmmakers were given permission. They worked out a deal. You have to make this film, but you have to shoot it by a certain date. Now, once that date lapses, you no longer have the rights to make that film. And they didn't want to lose the rights, so they made a real cheapy film called Pimpin' Pee-wee. And that happens also with Dimension and the Hellraiser films. Sometimes they're made because every few years you need to make a film, otherwise the rights revert back to the original right holder. And that also happens with the Spider-Man films. We believe that those films and those spin-offs help keep the license with someone else other than the rights holder. And then the thing with Meatballs 4, which, as I said, I didn't even know it existed, and I wasn't intending to include just because I don't really have any interest in the Meatball series. I didn't really have any interest in the
I didn't even know there was a Meatball 3 either.
Right. But I felt like I wanted to do my due diligence and see what was up with these. And I'm glad I did, because it for Porky's, it introduced this concept of the ash can copy. But with Meatballs 4, what happened, and it's a much longer story than we'll get to here, is that the film started production with Corey Feldman as the lead. under the title Happy Campers, and it was unrelated to the Meatball series. And partway through the filming, the producers learned that they could, if they retitled the film, they could sell it for more money. And so they walked on set, pulled the writer director aside, said, by the way, you're now making Meatballs 4. The director and / writer was not happy, nor was its star Corey Feldman.
Because then you just look like you're in a very down market film rather than an original comedy. You've got no chance of becoming sort of a cult, individual film. You're always going to be like, oh God, they've made another one of these. And oh God, that's amazing. Where does Ashcan have some sort of, is there a story behind the name? Or
there is, and I won't be able to tell it to you because I escaped my memory.
Okay, no worries. Maybe we can come back to that if it pops back into your head. There are so many like American Pie movies as well. There's another sort of whole series that sort of ran. I think Eugene Levy is maybe the only connective tissue long before he did Schitt's Creek, I imagine.
Yes, there's all these direct-to-DVD spin-off movies, American Pie : something, and then you've got the title American Pie in it, and then you put the colon, and then you come up with the subtitle, and it could be anything. Band camp, exactly, yeah. And you are guaranteed more eyes on your film than if it didn't have that American Pie colon.
Yeah, that's fascinating. That's really interesting the way the business works like that. I mean, I know there's a company. I was talking to a friend of mine about a company in America. The people who do Sharknado. Their original remit was basically, if somebody's making a movie like Barbie, they'll do a movie called Cindy, and it'll look the same. The poster will look the same, and it'll just.
Hey, I'm Ryan Reynolds. Recently, I asked Mint Mobile's legal team if big wireless companies are allowed to raise prices due to inflation. They said yes. And then when I asked if raising prices technically violates those onerous 2-year contracts, they said, "What the f*** are you talking about, you insane Hollywood ass?" So to recap, we're cutting the price of Mint Unlimited from $30 a month to just $15 a month. Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 upfront payment equivalent to $15 per month. New customers on first 3-month plan only. Taxes and fees extra. Speed slower above 40 gigabytes. See details.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Fiscally responsible, financial geniuses, monetary magicians. These are things people say about drivers who switch their car insurance to Progressive and save hundreds. Visit Progressive.com to see if you could save. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary. Not available in all states or situations.
Be basically to fool people into going, oh, this is, they'll, instead of doing, I don't know, Mad Max, it'll be Mad Mac. And, it's purely made as a kind of, to look like the thing and not to be that thing at all,
Right. That's why people generally think fourth movies, that's terrible, because it feels like a very cynical exercise of just separating moviegoers from their hard-earned cash. And it often is, as in the examples you came up with. But then there's also some really good ones. People really like Fury Road. That's the fourth film in the Mad Max series. People really like Avengers Endgame, which is the fourth film in the Avengers series. But it's also, which is funny, it's also the I don't know, I forgot the number, the 25th film or the 26th film in the Marvel series. So it is both a fourth film and a 26th film or whatever. But that's why sometimes filmmakers resist going for 4. Spielberg seemed to resist going to Indy 4. Coppola's resisted Godfather 4. Although, as a sign of respect for Mario Puzo, who co-wrote the Godfather films with him and the original book, he did have ideas for a part 4, and Puzo wrote those down, and it became a book, and But so, yeah, lots of times for the reasons you're just saying, it's best to avoid those things.
So, I mean, like with Mad Max, I would always think of the first three as an original, with the Mel Gibson trilogy. And then I would think of Fury Road and now Furiosa as the beginning of a new trilogy.
Yeah. I think that's fair. Absolutely.
How do you feel about Star Wars in terms of where?
Well, I devoted a chapter of the book to this question. The question is, what is the fourth Star Wars film? Is it what we can call now Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope? Is that the fourth one because it's Episode 4 / Chapter 4? Is it the Phantom Menace, which came after Jedi, which is Episode 1, or hear me out, is it the Ewok Adventure, the TV movie, if you were in America, which was released theatrically overseas? So if you were in Spain, your fourth theatrical Star Wars experience was the Ewok movie, and for you, dear moviegoer, that is your fourth Star Wars film. And so that's the cookie film I focused on for this book.
That was a brilliant get out of jail card you used there. That was and how let down most people have felt in Spain upon watching that and expecting, after Return of the Jedi, here we go again, and
Yeah. But that was an example of where they thought, there's something here. We could beef up the running time. We can release it overseas and reach that market. But let's not do it in America to sort of preserve what we think the Star Wars brand is, but possibly but don't necessarily care as much overseas, which is both telling and specific to that time, because now overseas can be greater than domestic America, and especially for these franchise films.
Absolutely. I mean, I thought I remember when I was a kid watching Battlestar Galactica at the cinema, and I think that was only a TV film in the United States.
Right. That's not covered in this book, but my vague memory is that was made as a sort of a pilot, which was released as a theatrical film to gain to increase interest in the TV series.
I'm not sure if they got into some legal action because of bits.
There were issues. I remember. Yes, I think there were. I think the Lucasfilm and ILM people weren't happy with that.
The other thing I wanted to ask in terms of we were talking about the different genres. Is there a genre that you think has is specifically more friendly to the fourth films? That there are more good fourth films in that genre than.
Not necessarily good, but I could say more.
Okay.
We might think of action films because you get to the Fast and the Furious and Lethal Weapons, and they do go pretty high, but horror films also get high numbers. Once you have a popular title, you could live off of it for a long time. Your Halloweens, your Friday the 13th, your Nightmare on Elm Streets. There was one that, and they can be cheaply made. And unlike an action film, a horror film can benefit from a smaller budget and a grittier, more aggressive style of filmmaking. That could help. Generally, you don't see low budget. Generally, the lower budget action films show, burst at the seams. And one of the reasons the Bond films look so great is the amount of money that they put into them. So horror is a real big one. Also in terms of just doing my due diligence, I wasn't that. There's a fourth Hatchet film. So Kane Hodder, who plays Jason in some of the Friday the 13th, is a star of this Hatchet series. It was Hatchet 1, 2, 3, and the fourth one was called Victor Crowley, which is the name of the character. And it's a fascinating interview with the filmmaker who made a fourth film entirely in secret, which I think is just so so cool. He made it and just sprung out as a surprise the fourth film to his fans in total secrecy. And it's also interesting because you also get to the naming convention. There, it's called Victor Crowley, not Hatchet 4. But he was trying to say that there's, getting back to what you were saying about Meatballs and Happy Campers, you can't attempt to make something that's unique if it has a 4 on it. It just looks bad. And so he was trying to do something different with his Victor Crowley fourth Hatchet films. But if there's a fifth film in that series, it's not likely to be Victor Crowley 2. It's going to be Hatchet 5. That's another thing is that there's a. I'm sorry, what do you say? I'll say quickly. Remember your thought is that there's all the naming conventions on these things is just bananas, from small things to little things. Like if you look at the Friday the 13th, they change from Roman numerals. There's no consistency with titles. So sometimes they're Arabic numbers and sometimes they're Roman numerals, and it's just another thing that that delights me about looking at fourth films is the lack of consistency and something like that. And now the trend is to not say Mad Max 5. It's to do the American Pie Cullen thing. Mad Max Fury Road. I think that was what it was called, but maybe I'm.
Yeah, no, it was Mad Max Fury Road, and then it's Furiosa : a Mad Max saga.
Yeah.
So it's like a saga. It's no longer, we're not going to bother numbering these anymore. I mean, that's exactly what I was going to ask you, actually, was about naming conventions, because it's really interesting when you get to 1, 2, 3, and then you throw in another. It's like Rambo 1, Rambo 2, Rambo 3, Rambo 4, and then you just go First Blood, and then you just go with Rambo again, as if it's like, okay, we're cleaning the slate,
Yeah, the titles on that are bananas, because it's the first Rambo film is called First Blood, and then the second one has a super awkward title where they try to keep the First Blood in, but they keep some of the Rambo in, and then by the third film it's just Rambo, and then they get to then they just give up on the First Blood of it all and just make sure they keep the Rambo.
It's interesting as well that you do these interviews, and it's kind of, especially with some of these interviews are about great movies, obviously, so that's quite a comfortable thing to do. But sometimes you are asking filmmakers like Joel Schumacher, what's up with that? What happened? Or or the actor who was in Jaws 4. With those, have you got to be sort of slightly careful about how you go about that?
Yes. And that's the thing, is that my intention is never to ridicule these films. Even if I don't love them, I recognize that a lot of talented filmmakers put a lot of effort into these films, and their care, and they did everything they could to make it good. And if you look at everything they could to make it good, and if you look at some of their films, like Lance Guest, the actor, Last Starfighter, Sidney J. Furie, who did Superman 4, these are, Schumacher's made a lot of really great films. And so it's trying to understand their intentions and have them talk about the experience. And I was very lucky to speak with Joel Schumacher, who couldn't have been nicer to me and didn't need to speak with me about Batman 4, 20 years after it was done. It doesn't benefit him really at all to speak to me about it in a book about fourth films.
Everybody who's ever interviewed him has said he's a wonderful person. I've always heard nothing but good things. Yeah.
So lovely. And what was interesting to me about Batman and Robin is that there's several things. There's many things that are interesting to me about Batman and Robin, but it is the same creative team as Batman Forever, so which did very well and a lot of people like. So it's the same director, writer, DP, costumes, editor, music. I think that's mostly true, what I just said. And then the same group of people came together and made something that most people didn't like when it was first released, and quote unquote kill the Batman franchise. So what that interview was about was in part trying to understand, how does that happen? How do people who make a film that the studio loves and that the general public love, or how do they come together and it doesn't quite add up? And that's the same thing with the Jaws 4. Is the premise of Jaws 4 is that this dead shark's friend or cousin is getting revenge on the other family members of someone who did his friend or cousin wrong. So that shark can't get revenge because the sharks that were killed in Jaws 1, 2, or 3 are dead. So it's sort of Charles Bronson. If you kill Charles Bronson, there's no more death wishes. So the premise doesn't make sense, but that was the premise. And so these filmmakers said, well, if we're going with that premise, and they convinced themselves that it is a good enough premise to work, let's do everything we can to make this film the best version of that story. And that's generally what happens, is the train leaves the station and the filmmakers try to make this the best version of that story, given the circumstances. And sometimes the circumstances are a not a great premise. It's not bad actors. You got Michael Caine, you got Mary Van Peebles. You've got Lance Guest. You've got some winning people. Superman 4 had Gene Hackman.
Yeah, he's not bad. He's not bad.
He's not shabby.
No.
So these are really talented people, and it doesn't always work despite their best intentions.
Yeah. And I wonder if sometimes it's just purely in that, in that interview with Joel Schumacher, he sort of says, we put too much story in. There was,
Yeah, because I asked him, remember your thought for someone saying, I said to him, I went through there's 9 subplots. Each character gets their own arc. Bruce Batman gets an arc. Bruce Wayne gets an arc. Dick Grayson, Batgirl, even the Butler. Everyone has an arc. And I went through it, and then he paused and he said, "Oh, maybe." And it was sort of in a whisper. He said, "Maybe there were too many." Mm-hmm. And it was like, that's what it occurred to him. Like, oh, maybe we stuffed it with too much. But I'm sorry, what were you going to say? Please, what were you going to say?
The other way it could be is just that there comes a point where the sort of story runs out of oxygen, the story runs out of space. And as you say, in terms of the Jaws films, there's no natural way of taking repeated shark attacks and connecting them to the same family. Exactly. It doesn't make any sense. And similarly, there's only so many times you can say, I can't believe this is happening to me again. That's what Bruce Willis says in Die Hard 2.
In the teaser trailer for Die Hard 2, he runs down this long hallway in a basement somewhere, and there's steam everywhere. And he runs into camera and says, "How could the same thing happen to the same guy twice?" And it's lovely. And the thing is that it can't. I didn't really love the fourth Die Hard film, so I didn't really approach those filmmakers to discuss it. Instead, I approached a guy who wrote a different version of Die Hard, and it's too long to get into here. But he said that he and Bruce would call their version, Die effing hard, but they didn't say effing. They really wanted to make a hardcore Die Hard film. And he goes into great detail about his version of it. And what I'll say now is that there's a scene where John McClane gets trapped on under a helicopter. And he's got this knife that he was going to give to his estranged son. And he uses that knife to hack off his own hand to get free of the helicopter. And that was not going to be the finale. So you would have had this Die Hard, or halfway through or whatever, Bruce Willis is running around without a hand. Now, could you also imagine how much that adds to the shooting budget? And then it was going to be a shooting hand. And so they really try to make it into something very different than what we got, which I think was a PG-13 film, if I'm remembering correctly.
Yeah, it's funny because like the original Die Hard had those masochistic tendencies as a sort of walking across broken glass in bare feet, and there's a real sense that they're putting their hero through a heck of a lot. It reminds me of the Leone westerns, and you always had the characters being beaten up at some point. To the other I wanted also to talk about Thunderball, which of course is the fourth chapter of a long running series. At that stage, obviously not that long running, but I always think of the peak of the James Bonds as being probably sort of Goldfinger. That feels like one of those big classics. But Thunderball was by far the most commercially successful for years and years and years, and that's the one where it all came together.
Yes. So when people think of the proto or the film where the Bond series coalesces, they think, as you do, of Goldfinger. But as you're saying, that Thunderball was infinitely more popular, and it had more butts in seats than any Bond film before or since, up to a point. Now things were not as carefully tabulated, and now there's more people, but its run is undisputed. I had written a few other books on James Bond. I wrote one called The Lost Adventures of James Bond, which is about Timothy Dalton's unmade third and fourth Bond films.
Oh, that's fascinating. Oh, what great subject that is.
Yeah, well, you can talk about that in another podcast.
Yeah, definitely. Okay,
I'll do those. So I wanted to do something different than I wanted to, for that film, for the case study for that film was, what's it like to make a fourth film when the series is still cresting upward? And so I spoke to one of the actresses on it who played the Bond villain, and she just spoke about, she gets into the production stories and war stories and falling off of bikes and all that good stuff, and working with Connery. But it's really she really just talks about how relaxed and confident the set was as filmmakers, and they were just comfortable making the film because they knew they were going to make something that people were going to see, and that permeated through every aspect of production. There's nothing like making a film with confidence if you're working hard.
Yeah, but I mean, that's really interesting to put those two together. Thunderball and Batman and Robin, because in a sense, that could have been the story of Batman and Robin. We got the team together. We got the team from a really financially successful series. There's no reason this film, big stars, no reason this film is not going to be, exponentially bigger than the last.
Yeah, and I think the difference there is a tonal. I think the Bond films have been effective in tonal changes. There's Goldfinger to Thunderball is just more. It's not a big tonal change. It's not going from Roger Moore and Moonraker to Roger Moore and For Your Eyes Only. You could get whiplash for that tonal change, and you could get punished for that tonal change. And with Batman 3 and 4, Batman 3 had its left foot in Tim Burton's world and its right foot in Schumacher's world. The aesthetic was more Tim Burton for 3. A lot of the cast, so some of the cast, the supporting players certainly were Tim Burton leftovers. And so he was taking over from another filmmaker while trying to keep some of his own identity. And so you get half Burton, half Schumacher for 3. And 4, you just get full Joel Schumacher, just turning it up, and some would argue too much. And he didn't have to. That was an aesthetic choice he made. Like if you look at Falling Down, you go, oh, that guy could direct a Batman movie. It's not what he didn't bring his Falling Down vibe. He brought his DC Cap vibe or something.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, he made Phone Booth. He made a thriller that's set in a phone booth. I mean, he can do anything, that guy. It's interesting what you said about Bond as well, because I think that was the poster. I think the poster was more thrills, more action, more Bond. It's which is kind of perfect, because it's telling you we've got the template, it's sorted, and we're just going to turn it up a little bit. And I think it's
the same but different.
Exactly, yeah, yeah. And you can see a progression, the first three getting increasingly more sophisticated, increasingly more there's bigger explosions at the end or what have you. And by Thunderball, yeah, it's you kind of start to get those battles that become a part of the climax of most Bond movies from then on, which you kind of don't have in Dr. No from
Daniel
Russia
Craig.
with Love.
Oh yeah.
Right at the beginning, it's Sean Connery often just turning a lever and running away. or beating up Red Grant in a train, having a fight in a train or something. Thunderball is one of those ones that I go back to and I enjoy, and I feel like I know the least of the Connerys. It's kind of like almost, and then you've got the thing of Never Say Never Again, which sort of blurs the memory of Thunderball, because it's the same story. It's a remake.
Yeah, I'm a Never Say Never Again fan. I think Sean Connery's performance in that is spectacular. I love how relaxed he is. I love the one-liners that he has, and the "You got me all wet, yes, but my martini's still dry" is one of the best in all of the Bonds. And I realized they didn't have the budget to really to make it compete with any of the Bond films, let alone Thunderball. But it's got Sean Connery as James Bond, and that makes me happy.
Yeah, I'm definitely. I'm glad it exists. It's got Johnny English in it. It's got Kim Basinger. It's in it as well. I'm all for there being more Connery Bonds. Is one of the points you make, as well as the Godfather, are there any other sort of fourth chapters that didn't happen that you
I did a chapter on the unmade fourth Spider-Man that it's incredible, because I spoke to someone who gave me the entire story of what Spider-Man 4 was looking like plot-wise, who the villains were, who the cast was. And it's a really long story, but they were trying to make Spider-Man 4 with Sam Raimi and Tobey Maguire, and it got close. They had a script. They were in pre-production. They were working towards it, and it got shut down. And that's one of those where it just got too expensive, not just from the story, but also I suspect from the creatives. Once your Tobey Maguire gets a payday, Sam Raimi gets a payday, deservedly so, and they were pushing the story. They were pushing Sam Raimi in a way that he didn't feel totally comfortable with. And after making Spider-Man 3 with a villain that he wasn't passionate about, he said, if I'm not going to make the film the way that I feel comfortable with, then I'm not going to make the film. He said, let me do what I want to do with these characters. And he had some extreme ideas. He said, you're going to reboot this thing when I'm done anyway. So let me make these bold creative choices. We'll make this, and then you reboot it, but they didn't feel comfortable with that. So they just made, they kind of remade the first, the next Spider-Man film that they made was with, Andrew Garfield, and it was another origin story.
Yeah, bloody origin stories. Sick of them at a certain point. I don't care where you come from. I care what you're doing. The only place in the world that Freud still lives well is in Hollywood, USA. I blame Orson Welles and his sledge. Listen, Mark, final question. This question, yes. Actually, I've not been asking it as regularly as I used to do. But have you got a film book recommendation that you'd like to give us?
I love film book recommendations, and that's why I love this podcast. Your podcast is that I love movies, but I also love books on movies just as much as I love movies, which is somehow wrong, but that's what I love about this podcast.
No, don't say that. Don't say that. You're absolutely my target audience.
So I've got a bunch because there's Hitchcock Truffaut is obviously an interview book between Alfred Hitchcock and Francois Truffaut, and it's both how I learned filmmaking. Watch a Hitchcock film, read the story. Watch a Hitchcock film, read that story. But it's also sort of the model for this book, where this interview style book, and it's informed my approach to writing these things. David Mamet wrote a great book on directing films that I highly recommend. Carol Rice wrote a book on film editing, which helped me get a job with him as an AD on a theater play, because I stole it from the library when I was a kid, and I loved it. And I was like, you wrote a book, on editing. So that just has
impressive. I'm impressed.
And then there's two more. There's Spike Lee wrote a book that published his diaries for the making of Do the Right Thing, which is very useful for young filmmakers. And then my last book is actually related to Orson Welles, and you mentioned Orson Welles earlier. It's a book by Jonathan Rosenbaum called Discovering Orson Welles, and it's a series of essays where he tries to write about Orson Welles, but the commentary before those essays has him correcting the record on his published work. So not only is it a insight into Orson Welles, but it's also an insight into film criticism and where as film critics we fall short. But obviously everyone should, before getting any of those books, pick up Movies Go Forth by Mark Edlitz. And
that's the best one. But we've had an hour of recommending that book. So 5 minutes.
But these are all great. I love these books so much.
Yeah, I was looking at my Simon Callow 3 volumes of his as yet incomplete biography. We're waiting for chapter.
We are waiting.
Volume. Which volume are we waiting for, Mark?
4.
There you go.
4.
There you go.
Oh.
See what I did? You see what I did?
I saw what you did there.
That's amazing. Thank you so much for coming on, Mark. It was a real pleasure reading the book and sort of gradually this random idea making total sense. So you won me over. So thanks so much for that.
Thank you for having me. It's really been so much fun being here and talking to you, especially after listening to you for so long.
If there's one thing that my family and friends know me for, it's being an amazing gift giver. I owe it all to Celebrations Passport from 1-800-Flowers.com, my one-stop shopping site that has amazing gifts for every occasion. With Celebrations Passport, I get free shipping on thousands of amazing gifts. And the more gifts I give, the more perks and rewards I earn. To learn more and take your gift giving to the next level, visit 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST. That's 1-800-Flowers.com/ACAST.
Cue the fireplace and your favorite fall movie. There's nothing better than a cozy evening at home with a glass of First Leaf wine. First Leaf is a personalized wine club that delivers right to your door. Sounds magical, right? They get to know your favorite tasting notes, which varietals you enjoy, and whether you prefer sweet or dry wines. So in every shipment, you get bottles tailored to your unique palate. Go to tryfirstleaf.com/fall to get your first 6 wines for just $44.95 with free shipping.
This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever think about switching insurance companies to see if you could save some cash? Progressive makes it easy to see if you could save when you bundle your home and auto policies. Try it at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Potential savings will vary, not available in all states.